Definitely a relatively old, this is a relatively old cartoon, but it really does tell us where we're at today. Crime has fully evolved to being online. And one of the things we need to think about is the reality that crime is therefore scalable. It'd be one thing for the bank robber to walk into the bank and, right out of the teller drawer, he might get a few thousand. If he gets in the vault, he may get a few 100,000. If he gets it online, and this has happened, he could get a few million to a few billion. So, and the added value is no fingerprints, no fibers, none of that stuff you see on CSI, right? It's remote. The attribution is fully electronic. And if they're in a country that has no extradition treaty, you're probably never going to find that bad guy. So the realities of cybercrime have impacted all of us across the board in a range of ways. We've seen it when we get those notifications that our credit card has been taken over, or there's been a breach at one of our favorite retail stores, that one of our credit reporting companies has been breached, that we have to do all this online credit reporting nonsense. It impacts all of us every day because it impacts society and our businesses every day. So for small businesses, it is a huge issue because it costs a lot to provide protection to your systems, but the downside can be so much more financially catastrophic of not paying attention to cybersecurity, that the reality is today, it's got to be one of your business priorities in protecting your systems. So today we're going to talk about a number of key questions relevant to cybersecurity, thinking about it from a small business perspective. What kind of incidents are occurring? Are there any specific trends? And who are the targets? Who are the bad actors? And why are they doing it? And most critically, and where we're going to spend most of our time today, is how they're doing it. What are the principles, technologies used to carry out those attacks? So first, what kinds of incidents are occurring? Are there discernible trends? So let's talk about the data on cybercrime. That's going to give us the information that we need. What qualifies as an attack or an incident? It's easier in some contexts when there's breaches. It's harder in others when there's theft of intellectual property. There's incomplete reporting. So not all incidents are detected. Not all detected incidents are reported. Measuring the number versus measuring the seriousness of the incidents is challenging. And how do you measure seriousness of an incident? Is it the number of actual records stolen? Is it the value? How long your system is down? How much it costs to fix everything? So annually, the Verizon issues what's called a data breach investigations report. It is one of many reports like this. It's the one that I think does a really nice job of compiling a significant amount of information. In fact, 83 contributing organizations from all the incident response firms, or a lot of the big ones, industry clearinghouses, law enforcement, and they collate that information. In 2020, the 2021 report is for 2020, but in 2020, they analyzed little over 79,000 incidents, only some of which met the standards warranting qualification as an incident. Of those, just under 30,000 actually qualified as an incident, which is a term that's actually specifically defined as security event compromising the integrity, confidentiality, or availability of data. Notably, the number of incidents were down from the prior year. And in 2020, there were 5,258 confirmed breaches. That is also a specific term. And it's actually become a legal term, meaning it's the disclosure or exposure of data. In other words, even if there's a hack and there's a potential breach or compromise of a system, if no data was actually observed or exfiltrated or stolen, it would not be considered a breach, but it may be considered an incident. So there were about 5,258 confirmed breaches in 2020, which was up significantly, over 1,000 from the year prior. And the incident and breaches occur across a wide range of industries, and the Verizon data breach report actually provides analysis as to specific industries. So that could be useful if valuable to you. So let's talk about the information as it applies to small businesses, according to the reports, less than 1,000 employees. Approximately a little over 1,000 incidents and 263 confirmed breaches of organizations of that size. And let's look at the makeup of the threat actors. Over 50% were external threat actors, but over 40% were internal. So it's a higher rate of internal threats to small businesses than it is for other size businesses. And why that's important is that means there was an insider either participating in the breach or executing the breach. 93% financially motivated. The rest are espionage, fun, holding a grudge, being frankly hacker idiots. That's the fun. And the data compromised has a consistent trend. Close to 50%, the data compromised were credentials. What does that mean? That's like your username and your password to get in to the system. And the reason that matters is that the very first thing that gets compromised is the credentials. That means the threat actor can get into the system, do whatever they want. They could lock data, they could steal data, all the things that we're going to talk about later in this presentation. There's also 39% is personal. That could be personal identifying information, that could be financial information. Other is a hodgepodge, often intellectual property. And 17% is medical, which is usually characterized as personal health identifying information, PHI. And as I mentioned, they do have an industry analysis in this report. This is a summary of the industry impacted for the entire almost 30,000 incidents in 2020. And as you can see, the majority are in the education industry, entertainment, and information, as well as public, meaning government, and professional, meaning professional services like what I do at a law firm. The unknown is actually the biggest number on this list, and there's a reason for that. A lot of times reporting is done anonymously. So Verizon would have no idea what the industry is, but at least they have the data to be able to assess some of the trends and what's happening. With respect to the patterns, first let's look on the left hand, it's patterns in breaches. The majority are social engineered. And I will explain what some of this stuff is in a few minutes. So I'm just going to walk through this slide first. The second is basic web application attacks. The third is pure system intrusion. And the fourth is miscellaneous errors. So those are the breaches. That's when actual data is exfiltrated. As opposed to the incidents, number one is denial of service. Number two is basic web apps. Notably, basic web app attacks are second in both breaches and incidents. Number three is social engineering. And number four is system intrusion, which again is just getting into your systems in whatever fashion. And with respect to the tools used in the impact, typically the majority of breaches, the actual exposure of data or exfiltration of data, involves a human element. What does that mean? It could mean that somebody in your organization clicked on that link. That's the number one lesson in this presentation. Stop clicking on those links. Somehow there was a human failure. Either they didn't change their passwords timely, they clicked on the link in a phishing email, they responded to a business email compromise, which we'll talk about shortly. So those are where the human failures happen. Sometimes a good number of breaches involve credentials. That's what I talked about earlier, your passwords, your usernames and your passwords. The most sought after username and password credentials are the administrative passwords, right? Those are the ones that have the most access in a system. And if the user is sophisticated enough within the system and the bad actor is sophisticated enough, they may have access to the Active Directory and therefore what's called the golden ticket, which is a full access across the system. On the selected impact of incidents, if you look at the numbers, the business email compromises have the highest financial impact. That means the most amount of money goes out the door directly relevant to the incident, which is not necessarily remediation costs. So as you'll see, there's a lot of additional financial impacts in here. Ironically, the number one everyone hears about is ransomware, but it could range as low as $69 and go as high as over $1 million. That's the one that I think is in the news the most, is ramped up the most, and it become quite profitable for the threat actors. All right, so let's talk about the who and the why. This is relatively straightforward. We've talked about hackers. These are criminal actors whose primary goal is financial gain. Sometimes they do it for activism. Sometimes they do it because they're having fun, defacement of websites, things like that. the majority are financial gain. We also have insiders, which I referenced earlier. A good number of threat actors for purposes of a small business are insiders. That's primarily financial gain, even in the form of intellectual property. There is a huge contingent of cybercrime committed by state actors. That is typically in furtherance of espionage, theft of trade secrets, which is economic espionage when it's involving a state actor, and pure cyber warfare. There are incidents in the last 2 decades involving significant bad actors involving nation states, creating, using cyber tools rather than what we call kinetic tools, which are actual physical war, in order to engage their enemy. An example is that the Ukrainian electric grid was taken down by a cyber attack, which was ultimately attributed by the Five Eyes, including the United States, which includes the UK, Australia, and a number of other allies. It was attributed to the nation state of Russia. So that is an example of cyber warfare. And then, of course, there's just negligence and physical theft. That's the failures within the system by the humans, and that is financial gain. So let's go to the most critical question here. How are they doing it? And what are the principal technologies used to carry out those attacks? So let's talk first about the types of tools that are out there. Social engineering. What does that mean? That is the human element of learning more about somebody in order to take advantage of them. Historically, those were like the grifters, the folks that are just become your friend, get to know a little bit about you, ask you a bunch of questions, and then steal from you, right? It's the joke of, okay, well, what's your mother's maiden name? What's the street you lived on? Those are all things that people tend to have in their minds and help remember their passwords. That is social engineering. But what also could be social engineering is on LinkedIn or on other social media when they're trying to understand more about who you are and what you like. Do you love certain type of dogs, or do you have an obsession with a specific sports team, a baseball team? If you have those loves, you can also be targeted based on that. That's what a lot of our social media algorithms are doing, but threat actors are doing the same thing in furtherance of their goals. So if you are social, I have a puppy. If my love of my puppy and love of all things puppies on the internet, if I get an email that showed, oh, if you click this link, you're going to get the cutest puppy pictures, that would be social engineering. But what do we know? What's the lesson here? Don't click on the link. Just go look for other puppy pictures yourself. Phishing. We all hear about this all the time. What is phishing? That is that link I was just talking about. Taking the information from the social engineering and using it to target individuals, hoping that they click on the link. That is a phish. There are a lot of different types of phish. You've probably heard of catfishing, which is using relationships and dating apps in order to target somebody. There is spear phishing, targeting somebody based on some specific type of information, some financial or intellectual property. There's so many different types, but the bottom line is taking advantage of the target's use of electronic communication tools, typically email, in order to get them to click on something that downloads some sort of malicious software or otherwise takes them to a malicious website, and then you're in cybercrime land. You are no longer secure. Clickware. This is the stuff that makes everyone crazy on the internet when you are just trying to read your news article and stuff keeps popping up and you're clicking on it to get rid of it. Well, that little X sometimes that's closed, sometimes can be clickware downloading malware. Now, most of our browser firewalls and our computer antivirus software are pretty sophisticated in keeping clickware from being effective, but that is a tool that's out there these days. Botnets. Now, we've all heard about the bots that sort of ran all of our social media during elections. The botnet is actually is taking advantage of a lot of computers. What that means is, and I'll explain this in more detail in a little bit, but what that essentially means is taking the computing power of one computer and then exponentially increasing it with lots of other computers. Vulnerability exploit or system intrusion. The critical thing here is if there is something in your software that's not correctly patched, which no one knows about yet, which is called a 0-day. Every time you get a software update from any of your service provider, Apple operating systems, Microsoft operating systems, your Samsung phone, like Android operating systems, whatever it is, every time they tell you to update it, the reason is it might be patching some sort of vulnerability in the software. Every time new software is deployed, sometimes there's something broken. It's not perfect, right? There might be a little bit of hole in the system, and the system tape or caulk to patch that and ensure that you are protected. That's the value of keeping your software up to date. So oftentimes, if there's huge vulnerabilities that maybe that large service provider hasn't figured out, bad actors can take advantage of that to an extreme. And a lot of the big hacks you've heard about, those involved vulnerability exploits and therefore an intrusion into the system. And then the internal failures and the insider threats, some of which we've talked about. The misconfiguration, miscellaneous errors is a huge one. This happens pretty regularly when people are, all the software that we use these days. And remember 20 years ago, we were just starting to get comfortable with all the software that existed for us at our organizations. I worked at SAP in the late 90s. That is still a system that's used today, but I can tell you the software has changed dramatically in those 20 years. And SAP was replacing legacy systems from the 70s and 80s. So oftentimes when you're configuring those systems, you have to make sure the old ones are fully taken off the network or otherwise properly configured to match the firewalls that are there. Those misconfigurations can create huge vulnerabilities in network systems. The miscellaneous errors that are also exist when you're deploying any kind of technology system. Privilege misuse, folks that have administrative access or other higher level administrative access, misusing that for their own purposes can also create vulnerabilities to and give threat actors a way in. It's kind of like leaving the door unlocked, right? That's the same concept. Lost or stolen assets and credentials, when you find out your employee lost their phone, left their laptop, signed in at the airport or in the hotel room, those are all risks, right? Because all those company assets have information on them, including potentially passwords and credentials to get into your system, access to the VPN, for example. I'll give you an example that's now public. The Colonial Pipeline hack involved, frankly, a VPN credential that hadn't been changed. It was no longer being used, but it was out in the system. It was still a password that was able to access that company's internal corporate information technology system there, but it hadn't been turned off. It hadn't been changed, and it somehow had been stolen and it was available for a threat actor to utilize. So that's a really critical entryway for bad actors. So let's talk a little bit about how some of this works. This is a very baseline example, but it's relatively straightforward. If you, at the top, you see how the cyber criminals send a phishing email to the victim, and the victim downloads it by clicking that link. Once again, stop clicking on those links. What it does is downloads a compressed file. So it's not visible to the user. They don't know what's happening. It's in the background, but you may click on the link and go to the website you want to go to, or whatever it is that interested you in that phishing email, but it's actually doing something in the background. And this is the CPL file. And what's happening is that malware, that malicious software, is infecting the victim's computer and creating an opportunity for the malware to monitor the computer, to do a ton of stuff inside the computer that the user may not be aware of. And by doing that, can capture a lot of information. And we'll talk about the different types of things that malicious software can do. Botnets, and I mentioned this earlier. Here's an example. So the bot herder, which is a kind of an old term, is really the threat actor taking advantage of a ton of different computers or types of computers. Anything that has a memory on it, right? A computer chip in it is a computer now. These days, that apparently includes our refrigerators, our microwaves. We have our smart homes, our smart thermostats. Everything is smart, right? Well, all of those are computers. All of that has computing power. And a lot of it can be harnessed to take advantage and create this botnet. If you have a really, really, really powerful supercomputer, you can execute a heck of a lot more crime than on just with your laptop, right? So one of the ways to do it is to send spam. Why do we care about spam? Well, guess where most phishing emails come from? It's spam. It's sending out tons of information to lots of people, hoping that somebody clicks on the link. Of course, sending in malware and then denial of service, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. This is an example of where we're at now. This is an example of what we call the Internet of Things. Everything is now computerized, which means all of these things can be herded as part of the botnet. Anything that has a computer chip can be part of this botnet supercomputer. Why does that matter? Well, because every single time you may not know that your systems are compromised. You may be using your video game thing or your home thermostat. It might be like sluggish, not working as fast at certain times. It might be because it's part of a bot and you don't know. And part of the reason it's so easy to take advantage of all of this, how many of you have smart technology in your homes? And because you're not worried about it, it's not like you're storing your data on it. There's no photos in it. You don't change the password that was provided to you by the manufacturer. Well, all of that information is available online, right? You get the help, you need help setting it up. You go to the online manual. Well, the password's in the manual. It's 1111 or 12345 or whatever baseline password. You don't change it because you don't really care, but you're not thinking, oh, well, now the hackers are using my thermostat as part of its computing power. Now, one thermostat, not that strong. 1,000 of them, 1,000,000 of them. There are botnets that are out there that have harnessed upwards of 1,000,000 or 2,000,000 computers. One of the most effective one was 500,000 computers, and it was run by a 16-year-old. And he took down multiple significant companies during the course of executing and operating that botnet before he sold it. The botnet for, I think, a few $1 million. So he's in jail now. So let's talk about the types of malware that are out there. It controls traffic to and from a browser. What does that mean? If you don't have control of your internet browser, can you imagine? If you try to go to ESPN.com and it keeps taking you to some crazy website, you no longer control your browser. Bad actors can do that. Capturing usernames and passwords, we've talked about how critically important your usernames or passwords are. It's your key to the system. So being able to capture that information through malicious software is critically valuable to a threat actor. Logging your keystrokes, literally everything you're typing. There was a case out of Florida. This was somewhat innovative. It was a bunch of college students who installed a keylogger on the college registrar's office or administrative office's one of the computers in order to be able to get all the passwords for the people who had access to the grades, and then they changed all their grades. So that's like a double whammy on innovative, but it was also double whammy in crime. So yes, they got prosecuted. College kids today. That was actually about 15 years ago, ironically. Activating a camera or microphone. So that, as we know, a lot of times there's a lot of risk because there are cameras everywhere now in our exercise machines, in our laptops, on our phones, on our televisions. And the value of that is this: two-way communications, being able to see each other. You can see me because I have a camera on my computer. What if the threat actor turned that on when I wasn't paying attention? They were able to see information in my home. They were able to, if I had my laptop, in a sensitive area in my house near my bathroom, or if they had, while I was typing up privileged communications with my clients on another computer. That's a critical risk and very scary. Of course, stealing files. Exfiltration is a #1, value for especially theft of intellectual property, theft of identifying information. Downloading, installing other files. Sometimes putting information on your system can be valuable because it can create opportunities to execute other malicious software schemes. Encrypting files. This is the primary game with ransomware actors, locking up all your systems. Destroying files, just deleting things. I've prosecuted cases involving almost all of these. I sometimes, while the ransomware encryption can be just devastating to a company, of course, its operations, the destroying files can also. And a lot of the cases I've seen, the destruction is usually a former insider, a disgruntled employee who has access or keeps access after they leave, hack in and just keep deleting everything. And how are you going to run your business if you have no files to operate off of, right? And in the cases I've seen, it shut down the manufacturing of a company. It shut down the client service software for a company. There's so much that your business runs on these days that uses technology. Deletion of your systems could mean you are at a standstill in operations. So deletions is critically dangerous, but also the log files. How do you figure out what happened and how to fix it if it's all your logs are destroyed? Logs are critically important for your forensics. Disabling competing malware and other software and other defenses that may be out there. One of the things that a lot of malicious software can do these days is literally turn off your antivirus once it gets in there. I mean, that's terrifying, right? But it's something that's possible by some of the more sophisticated actors. And attacking other computers. So if you are in a business that has multiple computer networks that might be separate, once it's in one system, it may be able to attack another system, or it may be able to attack a customer system or a vendor system. The supply chain is a critical part of this story as well. So these are the types of malware that are out there, and there are plenty more, but these are some big ticket ones. So then let's talk about the types of attacks. This is really important to understand because there are so many different ways threat actors can come at a business. But what's important is to understand that you can implement controls and policies to help prevent that. The business email compromise is still a big one. And as I mentioned in the stats earlier, it's one of the bigger financial hits. And I am shocked that this is still a thing because it seems so ridiculous to me. But every time it happens, I realize I can see how that happened. What does that mean? What is a business email compromise? Essentially, and one example, one of the big examples historically was an accounts payable employee at the company gets an email from the chief financial officer saying, hey, I'm traveling. We just picked up this huge opportunity. We want to send them a retainer. Please send $5 million to John Doe in Singapore. What is the accounts payable person supposed to do? It comes from the CFO. That's the CFO's legitimate email address. That seems totally reasonable. And it's not a crazy thing because the CFO is always out there selling things and as well as running the financial office. And so off that money goes. Well, it turns out the CFO has been sitting at home, was not traveling for work, or even if he was, didn't send the email. It was an email that was spoofed. There is a ton of threat actor software out there that you can spoof a company's email address, send an email and make it look like the email came from an internal employee. Another way of doing that is executing a phishing scheme, taking over somebody's account and getting information about some invoices that might be pending. So if you then say you take over an account from an accounts payable person, read all their emails and say, okay, well, customer A is owed 100 grand, but customer X is owed $500,000. Let's chase customer X. Maybe chase all of them because somebody may not bite, somebody might. And what they do is they create a new domain. So instead of shoba.com, it says shoba with bha.com. Are you really looking that closely at the email? And so accounts payable employee at shoba.com is now sent an email to the customer, and we are now communicating again. And the accounts payable person says, hey, don't forget, we got this invoice outstanding. Can you please pay us? Customer says, yeah, no problem. And then accounts payable person says, wait, by the way, we changed our bank. It's now in Singapore. Please send $500,000 to Singapore. And customer says, sure, we just want to pay our invoices. Well, what just happened? There's another $500,000 out the door. Those are the two primary examples of business email compromises. And I'll show a graphic of that in it shortly. The website pop-up or drive-by attack, this is the clickware I referenced earlier. This is very common. And you see it in the marketing tools, right? I shop at Ann Taylor, I get ads for Ann Taylor. It doesn't matter on what website I'm at, right? Because my internet knows me, unfortunately, too well. Even if you delete all your cookies, even if you clean up your cache, the systems are set up, the algorithms are set up for marketing. The problem is bad actors take advantage of that same information and drive dangerous links that look like things you might be interested in via the website pop-up or drive-by. And so the drive-by attack concept is the same as a pop-up. You are on the internet, you're looking at whatever you're looking at, and all of a sudden, oh, ad for Ann Taylor or whatever it is that I'm interested in. Oh yeah, they're having a sale. I forgot it's Labor Day. Let me click on that. What do we just say? Stop clicking on things. If you see an ad you were interested in, go to the website. Actually go to the browser and type in the website in the URL, or go to Google search and then type it in that way. Never click on the link to get to something. That's where you run into problems. The website watering hole attack, this is basically taking advantage of information that everybody is trying to figure out. So what's the watering hole? It's where, everybody's hanging out at the water cooler, chit-chatting about the big news of the day. Well, every time there's some significant event in the world or in your community, there are websites that talk about it. Those become watering holes because then you get website pop-up attacks. You have fake versions of those websites created. So we can think about that in Afghanistan relief and Hurricane Ida relief. Hurricane Katrina had a ton of these back then, where you are just trying to be a good Samaritan. Let me go get more information about Hurricane Ida, and let me see if I can send some money. And people are taking advantage of that, just like the regular fraud that happens. The website application attack, this is where most companies that have customer-facing websites need software to help them manage the information from the customer in an efficient way, right? If you want to be able to have some sort of form to fill out intel, be able to pay bills, be able to do whatever you're doing in a small business or any big business, you're not just going to have like a baseline browser. You're probably going to have a website application helping manage the internet traffic and the information that you're receiving. Unfortunately, vulnerabilities in that third-party software can create new holes into your systems. The web app attack is literally how the big credit company that got hacked a couple years ago, that's how it happened. And they did not patch their web app software, and they were breached. The distributed denial of service, I have a graphic on this, so I'll talk about that in a minute, and ransomwares. So let's talk about the BEC. I mentioned this earlier, I walked you through examples, but if you look at how this walks through, it's using social engineering and grooming in order to execute the scheme, in order to convince a user inside the company to send money to another bank. So one of the ways to stop this is to have protocols within the organization to ensure that, hey, if you get any request for a payment that requires a change in banking information, you have to verify that with your customer or your vendor. Call them, talk to a human, don't just do it by email. If you get an email request from somebody inside the company to pay something that seems weird, ask. These are all policies and compliance programs that can be implemented. We all know that most organizations are now by law required to have anti-money laundering programs in place. I often say cyber compliance programs are just as important. These are the anti-phishing trainings. These are these types of policies that, no money goes out the door without verification if it's to a new entity. Even with a new client, you want to verify their banking and customer information, right? That's normal. Well, if there's a change, why wouldn't you do those same verifications? That's the point of this exercise. So there are things from a policy, compliance, and legal standpoint that can assist in helping protect you in a prophylactic way from being victim to these types of attacks. I mentioned the watering hole attack. So this is a graphic showing literally how this works. It's just injecting it into the internet and taking advantage of that information. I talked about the web app attacks. So the botnet attack, this is an example of what a botnet can do for denial of service. So DDoS is a distributed denial of service. That means taking down a public-facing website just by using traffic. What do I mean by that? Imagine everybody who's in this webinar. I have no idea how many that is, but I'm going to just say the 50 people are in this webinar. All 50 of us try to go through that door, through my front door at the same time. Would that work? Of course not. One person at a time, maybe two. The reason just the denial of service attacks work is that it creates requests for access. So every time you type in CNN.com, it's actually an IP address, and it's going to CNN.com saying, hey, can I look at your website? That's all happening in the background. We don't really care. We want it to be seamless, right? That's how the internet works now. And there are domain providers and domain hosts that do that in the background for us. They translate things from numbers to words for us to be able to use it in our language, whatever that may be. The problem is if you have 1,000 people asking to check a website at the same time, they could probably handle that traffic, right? Because 1,000 people checking CNN at the same time, first thing in the morning, probably not crazy. 100,000, probably not crazy. A few million, not going to work. It can't handle it. So if what denial of service systems do is that it creates a program where it's hitting various websites through their IP addresses at exponential numbers in order to completely shut it down and make basically the door jam and everything just cracks and nothing works and the whole thing goes down. So that 500,000 botnet strong, 500,000 computers botnet strong that I mentioned earlier, which was Mirai, was the botnet, M-I-R-A-I. Mirai was utilized, among other things, to take down one of the biggest domain name hosts in the US. It's a domain name host that provides domain name hosting services for some of the biggest companies we've heard of, most of the social media, most of the news organizations, the Twitters, the CNNs. And so there was a day a few years ago in October where everything shut down. Everyone's like, is the internet down? Is the electricity down? Like, nobody knows what to do when stuff doesn't work like it's supposed to, right? It was a 16-year-old kid had hit it with a DDoS attack that shut down all of these websites. Now that was a very effective tool because it went to the host. But if they'd done the same thing just to the CNN website in and of itself, it would have just shut down CNN. And so I use that as an example because it's a tool to really wreak havoc on companies. It's really not a tool. And as you saw, the DDoS attacks were a high number of incidents, but not a high number of breaches. That's because typically you don't see any actual data exposed. You don't see exfiltration. It's just really disruptive. So it can cause losses because you're not operating for some period of time. Say one of the airlines booking system gets hit by DDoS and goes shut down. That's going to be a loss of money. Say it's systems to be able to let people on the plane, be able to confirm users or passengers. Can't get people on the plane, operations shut down. That's money and disruption. But it doesn't cause the loss of data in the same way, so it's not a breach. So that's a DDoS attack. Can be very disruptive and are still relatively common. There's a ton of software out there now that helps monitor for DDoS. So if it feels like a denial of service is coming, the system will protect itself and essentially shut down before it's officially shut down. So returning to operations is more doable. And then the big one, ransomware. This is probably the scariest moment for companies these days because of the realities of what it can do. When I first started talking about ransomware, I don't know, 9 years ago, it was not as common. And one of the things we noticed is that I would say to my students, okay, well, give me an example of something that could be really harmful. Oh, ransomware in a hospital. I was like, yeah, thankfully that's never happened. Well, fast forward 8 years, it happens all the time. There was a ransomware attack sourced to a nation state that shut down the entire UK national health system. Their hospitals are all networked because they have socialized medicine. The entire hospital system was shut down by a ransomware attack. I mean, that's patient data. That's people's lives. I mean, it was probably one of the most catastrophic ransomwares, but any ransomware is catastrophic. Think about a small business. If you cannot access your systems, what happens is your computer is infected. You cannot, it is completely locked, and you get these kinds of warnings that tell you, and if you want to unlock it, you're obliged to pay a fine. Now, these DOJ, FBI warnings on there are fake. It's in order to scare you, but this isn't real. All of this is in order to scare you into paying. The $200 is like the thing of the past. Now it's tens of thousands, it's millions. There was a period, there's also weird trends. There was a period of time, a bunch of state courts were getting hit with ransomwares, locking their computers. Nobody could process litigation paperwork, criminal defendant paperwork. I mean, the police officers were faxing stuff. It was stupid. But they were getting demands of like a few, $20,000, $30,000 because county courthouses don't have any money. I'm not really sure why they were getting hit. But it's so disruptive that I think the bad threat actors think, they'll probably pay. And so maybe it's lucrative. It's not a big lift to send a ransomware. Again, all they need is a vulnerability. Somebody clicking on a fish, somebody not updating their credentials, somebody losing their credentials. All of those create open doors for threat actors to walk right in and lock up your systems. But one of the things that has changed, that historically the single extortion game, demanding the fee to unlock the access to computers or services, has evolved to this new trend of double extortion. So you demand a fee to unlock, but then you also demand a fee to prevent the release of already stolen data. So they say, hey, we're a threat actor. We have 100 gigs of your stuff. We won't release it if you pay us. And by the way, you also can't access any of your other systems. So if you want to unlock it, you got to pay us for that too. That's double extortion. That has happened in a lot of the big ticket ransomwares you've heard of in the press in the last probably 6 to 8 months. The requirements are that you have to pay in cryptocurrency. Why? Because it's typically the game of threat actors is to work in an anonymous world, and most of the anonymous world is cryptocurrency driven. There is typically good customer service. That is changing some. This is a statement I've made for years, that if you pay them, you'll probably unlock your stuff. Law enforcement will always say, don't pay them, because why are we negotiating with terrorists, essentially? We don't want to incentivize the bad behavior. I agree with that sentiment as a general matter, but for business decisions, sometimes it's the only thing you can do, which is what happened, for example, in the UK hospital system. But these days, the laws are changing. So payment actually risks running afoul of regulatory and criminal laws in the US. For example, FinCEN has a ransomware advisory out now, and there are anti-money laundering considerations to take into account. There's also the sanctions regime, the OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, that's part of the Department of Treasury. That has ransomware guidance out there as well that you can look up. But what if you pay a threat actor? That threat actor happens to be listed or associated with an organization that's listed in OFAC. It's a specially designated name or individual. It's just like foreign terrorist organizations are listed on that. Can't send money to the terrorists, can't give money to Al-Qaeda, that's against the law. Also can't give money to the organized criminals who are engaging in cybercrime if they are known and they are designated. And OFAC is very, very good. They stay very on top of things. So some of the big ticket threat actors, and they all have the stupidest names, Revel with a capital R-E, DarkSide, all of these names over time are added to this list. And if you give money to a sanctioned actor, you risk regulatory fines, and you also risk running afoul of some of the sanctions rules that can result in criminal liability. Now, naturally, the criminal liability is only if you intend to help the bad actor, which is a payment of ransomware is not going to do. But this is where the problem is with insiders. If you don't know that an insider is helping, it puts the company at significant risk. So as I mentioned, law enforcement discourages payments for a lot of those reasons. And I think the business decision to pay is a very complicated one and requires a decision tree. So let's briefly talk about the infrastructure that exists to support cybercrime. Most of this stuff, ransomware, software as a service, malware, things like that, are all available on the dark web. So what's the dark web? It's the same internet that you and I are using right now. The difference is that there's multiple layers. So if you have a more encrypted data, if you're a business that provides sort of medical billing, there's a lot of information that's available in your systems that are important that may be accessible through your intranet, but it's encrypted, it's protected. That's the deep web. The dark web is the illegal game. This is only accessible through an anonymized system to access the internet. It's called Tor, the onion router. It was created by the Navy. It was sold to for their encrypted systems before they upgraded to what we now use in the government. Then Tor was sold to a nonprofit. It's called the Tor Project. The value of Tor is that for any oppressed individuals in totalitarian societies have access to information in an anonymized way. Okay. There's no freedom of information if there's no freedom of press. This is
now, what did you want me to look at in terms of Q&A? There's no open questions.
I can't actually see the questions, so if you want to help me out there, I'm just going to run through the rest of this. I've got 10 minutes, right? Hello?
What do you want me to say?
Sorry, is that somebody's asking me about questions?
Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to keep going. So the dark web gives you access to a lot of illegal activity. So I'm going to show you a couple slides. This is what was AlphaBay, the marketplace that FBI and the DOJ took down about 3 or 4 years ago. Here's an example on the left of how extraordinarily, hello?
Makes sense.
Okay. How on the left here, you see, instead of like the Amazon categories of books and home and garden, you have fraud or drugs and chemicals, weapons, digital products, software and malware. You can buy your ransomware on the internet. And they're looking, and having good credentials on the dark web matters just like it does for a seller on Amazon. They care about their ratings, but they're looking at stealth, quality and value for pricing, right? Instead of, because they're talking about the value of the narcotics. I think down here, really high quality Bolivian cocaine. So it's a dangerous place involving all illegal contraband and activity. You can also buy assassins. You can have somebody killed or maimed. So I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about mitigation tips. So make sure that you have IT support for your system, even as small businesses. If you want a third party, there are plenty of companies out there that provide external support for small businesses. You need to use them. Do not try to operate your own network without the experience, because the risks are too high, particularly if you have client data, if you have PII, personal identifying information. We want you to keep your software updated. What did I say earlier? Patch, 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 because if you don't, there's the risks that a vulnerability that may have been patched by the software, you have not upgraded yet. Use legitimate antivirus software that helps in your protections. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is part of the Department of Commerce, actually provides a ton of great information about cybersecurity standards, best practices, guidelines within the US industry. Now, it's for primarily federal agencies and federal contractors, but really it's used by a lot of private actors now because it creates a great amount of information that they've collated based on a ton of expert information and analysis. So I highly recommend checking out some of the public information out there to help in cybersecurity practice. The mitigation tips also have an incident response plan in place. This is crisis response. These days, everybody, I have clients with 50 employees and 50,000 employees, and both are dealing with the same issue. And having an incident response plan in place is critically important. And have a cyber incident response firm in place. You don't have to have a retainer with them. You don't have to have a master services agreement, but having lawyers to help you with mitigation of liability and having the forensic cybersecurity incident response firms in place, so you can call them when you know you have an issue in order to help you navigate all of the business decisions that you need to make. You want to practice that plan as well, because the practice makes perfect, right? In the fog of war, it's hard to know what to do, but if you've practiced it, you're more able to execute in the moment. Provide anti-phishing training for your employees. This is critically important because I know everybody thinks they know what a phish looks like, but then why does everyone keep getting hit with business email compromises and phishing, right? But there's tons of trainings out there that you can find to help and deploy to your employees. And then tracking the changes in the law and reporting requirements are really important because this is an evolving area. Historically, you didn't have to report. I've told you the Verizon data is based only on what's actually reported. There is not currently a mandate to report a cybersecurity incident. That will change. And I'm saying that because in May of this year, President Biden issued an executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. So a lot of these things that are listed in this slide are available in that EO, which is available online. There's tons of guidance out there about it. It applies to government contractors, but the expectation is that it will start to apply across the board. And frankly, almost everybody is in the government supply chain these days. So be conscious of that too. Even as a small business, if you're at all subject to the FAR or DFAR, which are the federal acquisition regulations, the defense federal acquisition regulations, you may be subject to these changes. So there I am. Are there any questions at this time? I believe chapter administrator was gonna ask me some questions. I can't see the chat, so.
Yeah, Shobha, can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
Yeah, the question that I had was early on, you were saying that a large percentage of the incidents were internal.
Correct, for small businesses specifically.
Yeah, and also that then the other major factor in here was actually just clicking on the links. It was personal, personal action, I think you called it, or something like that. So a question I have is, it sounds like actually security awareness is probably one of the best things you can do as a small business or as a large business as well to mitigate some of that, is just let people make people aware
yes.
of the fact that they shouldn't link on or click on that and keep doing that and keep practicing that? Is that how do people how do you suggest small businesses do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really the anti-phishing training. I mean, you don't have to have an expert in house. You can hire. There are so much anti-phishing training webinars out there these days.
Mm-hmm.
Most of us have to do it. I've had to do it. And I have a lot of jobs, right? I worked at the government. I now just 6 months ago, I now work at a law firm. I work in 2 law schools. I have to do anti-phishing training, which is essentially computer security awareness training for every single one of them. And it's mandated every year. Just like anti-sexual harassment training is mandated by law. Right now, the anti-phishing or computer awareness, security awareness training is not mandated. I think it should be, but I do it at every single one of my jobs. And I think it's really valuable. Everybody is annoyed by it. Oh, I know what a phishing looks like. Do you? Because why do people keep clicking on them? So I think it's critically important for companies to understand the risks, like little things, because if you, in your computer security awareness, you see how things go sideways. If you understand that, it's more likely that you will be more careful. It's all about being careful, right? Taking an extra moment before you click on the link, before you respond to that email, before you go to that website. But a lot of us are moving at such a fast speed these days that security awareness training can be critically important to a company. I can tell you every time we find the incident of compromise or the indicator of compromise, for where the breach came from, when a company is dealing with a catastrophic breach, it's oftentimes one person did something stupid.
Yeah, it's amazing. And, you know, I confess I've done that. I've clicked on something, yep. I've clicked on something stupid. But you know, if it looks suspicious or in any way odd, no matter who it's coming from, definitely check it here. So another question here. I own Stacy says, I own a small wholesale e-com business where social media is critical to my clients. Do you have any recommendations for resources or best practices for social media security?
So I can't give technical or legal advice in this context, but my suggestion, it's very good to be conscious of that. And I would get third-party advice. If you don't have it in-house, you can talk to the cybersecurity response firms, cybersecurity advice firms. There's tons of those resources out there to understand where are the areas of risk. Social media is a hugely valuable tool for all companies in order to go out and sell and get customers and communicate with their customers. But if you don't know how to protect yourself in that process, that's where the risks are. So I would research, now that you know, hey, I want to secure my social media, you can actually go out there and look for a company that can help you with that.
Okay, great. And one question we have here is, what antivirus software do you recommend for small businesses? And I know you can't recommend anything.
I can't. I get that question every single time I do this presentation. I can never recommend software. I will tell you again, like anything, any consumer product, there's rating systems out there. There's tons of great information from all the consumer rating companies. You can do the research to find what's going to work. But a lot of it is just knowing that you should be paying attention to this. You would be amazed by how many companies don't even have firewalls because they just think it creates too much sluggishness in the system and they want to operate really fast. Well, that's crazy.
You know, I do know as well that a lot of times the internet service providers, certainly for home, like Comcast and those people, they provide antivirus software free as part of their service. So I think that question would best be directed to whoever is providing your internet service to ask them to recommend whatever they want here, you know, on that. And here's another question about clicking on common attachments like Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. What are the thoughts on that?
So typically, if there's a document attached and it's from a known person, it's typically fine, right? Documents do contain malware. So again, you want to be really careful. Is it, you know, a lot of our email systems now say this is from an internal person. You sort of know, you probably know them if you're in a small business. But if it's from an external person, they'll say, warning, external email. Every time it's from an external person, particularly if you don't know the email address, I would not open the attachment until you verify. If you know that, you want to make sure you're paying attention to who it's coming from. Everything, it's all about think about how you function out in the world. A little bit of extra security when you're in a city or on a subway, you know, you're paying attention to your purse, you're paying attention to your wallet. These are the same sort of security moments that you want to have in operating on the internet. When you're inside your network and you're talking to only your people, you're probably a little bit safer. You're inside your house. But the minute you're traveling out on the internet into places you may not know, you're communicating with strangers, you want that added layer of protection. So thinking about online like you do in your physical security is a great way to analogize it.
And I know one thing as well from all the various training that I've had to do is that as you know, when you get an email, it will say from, let's say, John Fisher. But if you look at the actual email address, it could be, you know, blah, 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 .gmail.com or whatever. So if the address doesn't correspond to the person, then just delete it, get rid of it, because it's you know, it's not from, anyone can say it's from me. But you know, but it's more difficult for them to I think that's called spoofing. It's more difficult for them to spoof my actual email address.
Well, it's not. So that's what I talked about earlier. So again, everything is about being careful, looking closely at the emails, knowing what information coming through makes sense, verifying.
Yeah, it is. It is amazing you know, the amount, the insidiousness of some of this stuff. I mean, it's like
criminals are criminals. You gotta assume that they're going to be just as crazy online as they are in person.
Yeah, that's true. We have one question here about is a hardware upgrade, should that be a priority versus just training and software upgrades?
I mean, hardware sort of depends on what your operating system requires. Hardware is really about processing power more than anything else. So, you know, having old hardware usually just doesn't run at the same efficiency as new hardware. So that's more of processing. If you have an old system, it's not gonna be able to operate some of the newer antivirus software, for example. So that's just a trade-off. So less than a security risk.
And I also got a note here that's in the chat, so people may be able to see that, but it says that SCORE mentors have access to a SCORE partner called Software Advisor, where you can get some free suggestions on software here.
That's great.
Let's see if we have any other questions here. You know, I think this is a great, this has been a great presentation here.
My pleasure.
Shoba, and you know, it's scary, which is what it should be.
Yeah.
Because this whole thing is just extremely scary when you think about it. One of the things that that hit me, or I learned a while back, is that a lot of these hackers are actually, just like you said, it's a country, it's a government, it's an actual corporation that does this. It's not just kids in the basement or in their garage.
Well, it could be both. I think I've dealt with actual organized crime syndicates that are really just kids in a basement, but there are a lot of them that they're terrible.
So you never know, but it really doesn't matter whether they're kids in the basement or whether they're organized.
Catastrophic regardless. Yep.
Yeah, they're trying to get money from you here.
Yep.
So you know, so I think if we can go to the oh, here you go, the upcoming SCORE webinar. So we've got a webinar on the 23rd of September. Pop to the top using Google My Business, which is one of our very popular webinars. Is sort of a series that we've been doing on using Google Analytics, and now Google My Business. And then on October 5th, we have a webinar called "So You Want to Start Your Own Business, Now What?" for people who are looking at thinking about starting a business. But one of the things that you know, we would like everyone here to know is that the free mentoring is available through SCORE. It is free and confidential, but just please go to northchicago.score.org to sign up for a mentor here. And Shoba, thank you very much. This is, like I said, this has been very, very enlightening and very scary all at the same time. And it is, you know, any let's see, we got one more question here potentially, but I think we may be good. So thank you very much, and we will, we will all be a little more careful here. Oh, here's the question: who would be the proper authority to investigate crimes?
So as a law enforcement matter, typically the FBI, they have a robust cybercrime operation. I've worked with that. That's mostly who I worked with. There are a lot of the other law enforcement agencies actually do investigate cybercrime. Homeland Security investigations, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security, does. The Secret Service does. Local police do it. So I think any of the above, but FBI actually has also a good hotline and an online reporting system to be able to report any issues. There is also a lot of information through the Department of Homeland Security CISA, cybercrime website, CISA. So those are two resources. FBI actually has a lot of great resources for small businesses as well on their website. Oh,
great, great. And I would guess, I mean, cybercrime in most cases is something that is, across states or across international boundaries. So
yeah, once you're dealing with the internet, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So the FBI is probably the best place to do that. So
good question. Thank you.
And for everyone listening, we want to let you know that this was very a very helpful seminar here. So I will see you guys at the next SCORE webinar, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much, John. Thanks for inviting me. Take care, everyone.